The air smelled of fresh coffee and pine wood as I stepped into the newly renovated lobby of the Cascade Retreat, my family's lakeside resort in Washington. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden hues on the polished wooden floors. The lodge had never looked better, because I had spent the last 18 months making sure of it. I should have felt a sense of accomplishment, but the tightness in my chest wouldn't let me. Today was supposed to be a celebration. The board meeting was set, and I had prepared a detailed presentation showcasing our best financial quarter in over a decade. I was finally going to secure my rightful place as CEO, a role I had worked tirelessly for. But then, my world stopped. "We've decided that your cousin Liam will take over as CEO, my father's voice rang out, calm and unwavering. I blinked, gripping the stack of reports in my hands. Did I hear that right? Excuse me. My voice came out sharper than I intended. My mother sighed, giving me the same look she had since childhood, whenever she thought I was overreacting. "Savannah, dear, Liam has the leadership skills this resort needs. You're great with numbers, but you focus too much on the small details. We need vision, and Liam has that." Vision. I nearly laughed. Liam, my younger cousin, had spent his entire 20s hopping from one failed business venture to another, living off my uncle's wealth, while I was in the trenches of the hospitality industry. I had left my prestigious hotel management job in Seattle, sold my apartment, and poured my entire savings into revitalizing this resort when it was on the brink of foreclosure. Liam had barely been here, yet somehow, he was the one getting the keys to the empire I had rebuilt from the ground up. I turned to my father. "You begged me to come back. You told me this place wouldn't survive without me. I've doubled our revenue, boosted customer ratings, and secured 3 major corporate retreat contracts." Dad's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't meet my eyes. "We appreciate your efforts, Savannah. But Liam, well, he has a different kind of charisma that we believe will help the resort thrive in the long run." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Liam strolled into the meeting room then, hands in his pockets, flashing his usual cocky smirk. "Hey, cuz, no hard feelings, all right? You'll still be a big part of the team. I mean, someone's got to handle the boring operational stuff, while I take us to the next level." I gritted my teeth so hard it hurt. The next level? Liam's idea of leadership was throwing lavish parties at the lodge, schmoozing with wealthy guests, and making empty promises about modernizing the business without having any real execution plan. He knew nothing about the logistics of running a resort. And yet, here I was, watching my life's work handed to him like some inheritance prize, while I was expected to gratefully accept whatever role they thought suitable for me. The staff was already gathering in the lounge for the announcement. Many of them, people who had trusted me to turn this place around, were expecting me to step into leadership officially. Now, I would have to watch them be blindsided. I swallowed down the burning rage threatening to rise in my throat. My hands trembled as I set the financial reports down on the conference table. The facts, the numbers, the months of sacrifices. None of it mattered to them. I glanced at my parents one last time. They had made their choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. A new plan was already forming in the back of my mind, sharp and decisive. If they thought I would stand by and watch Liam ruin everything I built, they were dead wrong. They had just made the worst mistake of their lives, and soon they were going to regret it. I walked out of that boardroom with my head held high, but my hands were clenched into fists. My heart pounded so loudly in my chest that it drowned out the murmurs of the staff gathered in the lounge, waiting for the big announcement. I couldn't let them see me unravel. Not yet. As I stepped through the lobby, I locked eyes with Maya, our head of guest services. Her brows furrowed slightly, sensing that something was wrong. She had been with the Cascade Retreat for over 15 years, long before I returned, and had been one of my biggest supporters during the resort's revamp. She mouthed, "Everything okay?" I forced a smile and nodded, but I knew I wasn't fooling her. I barely heard the announcement as my father proudly introduced Liam as the new CEO. I didn't need to. I already knew how it went. A carefully crafted speech about the future of the resort, about fresh ideas, and about how Liam would lead us into a new era. It made me sick. I glanced around the room at the staff, people who had poured their hearts into this place right alongside me. Their reactions were mixed. Some confused, some outright concerned. They weren't stupid. They knew Liam wasn't the one who had rebuilt this resort. Still, no one said a word. When the announcement ended, polite applause filled the space, but the energy in the room was heavy. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to see Josh, our head chef, who had left a 5-star resort in Seattle to join our team because he believed in my vision. "Tell me this is a joke," he muttered, keeping his voice low. I exhaled sharply. I wish it was. His jaw tightened, and I could feel the same frustration I was battling reflected in his eyes. I knew I had to get out of there before I did something reckless. I slipped out of the gathering and into my office, slamming the door behind me. I leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. My fingers curled into the edge of my desk, knuckles turning white. The betrayal was suffocating. After everything I'd sacrificed, leaving a high-paying job, selling my condo, and pouring every bit of energy I had into this place, they had still chosen Liam. For what? Because he could flash a charming smile? Because he had some vague ideas about attracting influencers and rebranding? He had no clue how this business worked. I pulled up the resort's financial reports on my computer. The numbers didn't lie. In the past 18 months, I had doubled our revenue, increased occupancy rates by 60%, and boosted guest satisfaction scores to the highest they'd been in over a decade. I had built this success, and now I had to watch Liam tear it apart. The final straw came later that evening. I was still in my office, running through contingency plans, when an email notification popped up on my screen. Subject: Immediate policy changes. I clicked it open, and my blood ran cold. Liam had wasted no time. He was already slashing costs, gutting the premium guest services that had set us apart from our competitors. The complimentary wine tastings that had helped drive high-end bookings, canceled. The wellness retreat program, which had been one of my biggest passion projects, scrapped. Even worse, he was cutting staff hours, forcing the team to do more with less pay. My stomach twisted. He was destroying everything I had built. My fingers hovered over my keyboard, ready to fire back an email demanding an explanation. But then I stopped. This wasn't my fight anymore. They had made that very clear. So instead, I pulled up a different document, one I had been working on in secret for weeks. A proposal for a new resort. My resort. I had always dreamed of owning my own place, of creating something that was entirely mine. I had spent countless nights sketching out ideas, making notes about what I would do differently if I were in full control. And now, this was my chance. I closed Liam's email, refusing to give him another second of my time. I wasn't going to fight for a place that had already decided I wasn't worth keeping. Instead, I was going to build something that would make them regret ever underestimating me. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stayed in my office, running the numbers over and over again. Could I actually do this? Starting my own resort from scratch wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It was a necessity. I wouldn't sit back and watch Liam butcher everything I'd worked for. By morning, I had a plan. The first step was finding the perfect location. If I was going to leave the Cascade Retreat behind, I needed something better. A place where I could build something that reflected my vision without the baggage of family interference. I knew exactly where to start looking. Years ago, before I returned home, I'd been eyeing a small but stunning lakeside property about 20 minutes away. It had been a historic inn, once a go-to spot for travelers seeking quiet luxury, but it had fallen into disrepair over the years. Unlike the Cascade Retreat, this place wasn't burdened by outdated business models or nepotism-fueled decision-making. It was a blank slate. I reached out to my old friend Kevin, a real estate investor I'd worked with in Seattle. "Tell me you're not calling to vent about your brother again," he joked as he picked up the phone. "Not this time," I said, my voice steady. "I need your help. I'm starting my own resort." There was a pause, then a slow chuckle. "Well, damn. That's what I like to hear. Tell me everything." I filled him in on my plans, how I wanted to modernize the old lakeside inn into a boutique wellness retreat. My years of experience at the Cascade Retreat had given me the perfect blueprint for what worked and what didn't in this industry. I didn't just want to compete with the Cascade Retreat. I wanted to outshine it. Kevin was intrigued. He told me he'd look into the current ownership status of the property and connect me with some potential investors. That was all I needed to hear. This was happening. Over the next few weeks, I worked in stealth mode. I still showed up to work at the Cascade Retreat every day, but my focus had shifted. I watched Liam from a distance, noting every misstep he made. He didn't just lack experience. He lacked common sense. He cut costs in all the wrong places, ignoring the guest experience in favor of making short-term financial gains. He started outsourcing housekeeping to temp workers instead of keeping our trained staff, which led to a wave of guest complaints about cleanliness. He ignored local partnerships, cutting ties with businesses we'd worked with for years to find cheaper alternatives, which, of course, backfired spectacularly. The resort's reviews tanked. Occupancy rates dropped for the first time since I took over the business. And yet, my parents still refused to admit their mistake. At home, Mom would sigh and say, "Liam just needs time to settle in. You're being too critical, Emily." I stopped arguing. I knew what was coming. They would regret this. Meanwhile, things were moving fast on my side. Kevin came through. He put me in touch with the owners of the Lakeside Inn, who had been eager to sell for years, but had never found the right buyer. Within a month, I had secured the property and finalized the purchase. The moment I stepped onto the land, I knew I'd made the right decision. The lake stretched out like a shimmering mirror. The pine trees surrounding it swayed gently in the wind, and the historic architecture, though in need of some serious renovations, had undeniable charm. This wasn't just a business venture. It was a fresh start. I began assembling my team, starting with the staff Liam had driven away. Maya was the first to jump ship. When I told her my plan, She didn't hesitate. "I always knew you were too good for this place," she said with a grin. "When do we start?" Josh followed soon after, then the housekeeping staff, then our guest relations manager. I wasn't stealing the Cascade Retreat's employees. Liam was pushing them away, and I was giving them a better home. The day the Cascade Retreat hit an all-time low was the day I knew I had won. I was finishing up a meeting at my new property when Maya texted me. "Maya, you need to see this. Staff meeting just ended. It's bad." She sent me a screenshot of the latest guest reviews. It was brutal. Guests were furious over the lack of service, the cleanliness issues, and the corporate feel that had taken over what was once a warm, personal retreat. People weren't just complaining. They were canceling reservations. But the real kicker, an email from a major investor, one who had been considering a deal with the Cascade Retreat. Subject: withdrawal of investment proposal. I read the email carefully, my pulse quickening. They were backing out. The Cascade Retreat's future had once looked promising under my leadership, but with Liam at the helm, it was falling apart. I almost felt bad. Almost. That night, I got a call from my father. I let it ring. Then another from my mother. Then finally, one from Liam. I answered that one. "Emily," he started, his usual cocky tone now edged with panic. "We need to talk." I leaned back in my chair, glancing out at the peaceful lake outside my new office window. "About what?" I asked casually. He hesitated. "There are issues at the resort. Investors are pulling out. The staff—" He stopped himself, probably realizing most of them had left for me. "I'm sure you'll figure it out, Liam," I said, mirroring the exact words he had once said to me when he stole my position. "Emily, come on. Good luck, Liam." And with that, I hung up. I wasn't going back. I had my own empire to build. I knew the call from my parents was coming. It had been inevitable from the moment I walked away from the Cascade Retreat. Now that Liam had run the place into the ground, they finally realized their mistake, and they wanted me to fix it. My phone buzzed as I was reviewing some final design plans for the Evergreen Lodge, my new boutique retreat. "Mom." I let it ring. Then Dad's number popped up right after. Ignored. They had made their choices. Now, they could live with them. The next day, they showed up at my office unannounced. I was in a meeting with my head of marketing when my assistant hesitantly poked her head in. "Emily, your parents are here." I sighed, closing my laptop. "Send them in." I wasn't nervous, just curious. Had they come to apologize? To beg? To finally admit that they had underestimated me? Number. Of course not. Mom entered first, her face carefully composed, followed by Dad, looking uncharacteristically tense. And behind them? Liam. The sight of him nearly made me laugh. He wasn't wearing his usual arrogant smirk. His shirt was wrinkled, and the circles under his eyes suggested many sleepless nights. Good. "Emily," Mom started, folding her hands on my desk as she sat across from me. "We need your help." I leaned back in my chair, making a show of being completely unbothered. "Do you?" Dad sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "You know about the investor pullout, and the guest cancellations, the Cascade Retreat. It's struggling." I raised an eyebrow. "And whose fault is that?" Liam flinched. "Come on, Emily. This isn't about blame." I tilted my head. "Really?" "Because I seem to recall you gloating about how you were going to take my work and make it even better." He stiffened. Mom cleared her throat. "We made a mistake. We should have considered your experience more seriously." I almost laughed at the phrasing. They still couldn't say it. They couldn't say, "We were wrong. We shouldn't have pushed you aside. We should have trusted you instead of handing everything over to Liam, just because he was our golden boy." Instead, they just tiptoed around the truth, hoping I'd throw them a lifeline. But I wasn't their safety net anymore. I crossed my arms. "So, what exactly do you want from me?" Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Liam needs help turning things around. We were hoping you could coach him." I let out a short laugh. "You want me to clean up his mess?" Liam bristled. "I don't need you to clean up anything. I cut him off. "Then what, Liam? What do you need?" He opened his mouth but had no answer. I turned back to my parents. "You gave him everything. You let him take my role, despite all the work I put into that resort. And now that it's failing, you come to me?" Mom pursed her lips. "Emily, you're being unfair." I scoffed. "Unfair?" I leaned forward. "Let's talk about unfair. Unfair is giving away my legacy after I spent years building it. Unfair is dismissing my expertise because Liam is your favorite. Unfair is watching you all smile while I was shoved aside like an afterthought." Dad sighed. "We understand you're upset." "No," I said firmly. "You don't. You never have." The room was silent. Liam stared at the floor. My parents exchanged worried glances, realizing for the first time that I wasn't budging. I tapped my fingers on the desk. "So what's your backup plan?" I asked. Mom hesitated. "We don't have one." I nodded. "Then I hope you're ready for the consequences." Dad leaned forward. "Emily, please." For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something. Nostalgia, sadness, maybe even pity. This was my family, after all. But then I remembered all the times they dismissed me, all the times they chose Liam's comfort over my efforts. I had spent years begging for their recognition. Not anymore. I took a slow breath. "I'll make you one offer," I said. Their heads shot up, hopeful. Liam looked relieved, like he thought I was about to rescue him. I wasn't. I folded my hands neatly. "I'll take over the Cascade Retreat, but not as Liam's assistant, not as his coach." I leveled them with a look. "If you want my help, I take full control. I run the business." Liam went rigid. Mom opened her mouth, instinctively about to refuse, but Dad held up a hand. "We'd have to discuss." I shook my head. "No discussion. That's my only offer." Liam shot to his feet. "You're trying to push me out." I turned to him. "I don't have to push you out, Liam. You already ran it into the ground." His face flushed red. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you?" I met his glare with a calm, steady look. "No, Liam. I know I am." Mom sighed heavily, finally facing the reality of the situation. "This isn't easy for us, Emily." I shrugged. "Then it sounds like you have a choice to make." Liam stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Mom and Dad stayed seated. Dad looked exhausted. Mom looked like she wanted to cry. I didn't feel bad. I had spent too long waiting for them to see my worth. Now, they had no choice but to acknowledge it. After a long silence, Dad rubbed his temples. "We'll call you soon." I nodded. "Take your time, but don't wait too long." Because if they said no, I wouldn't lose a thing. I had already built something far better than what they refused to give me. And I wasn't looking back. I had expected my parents to call the next day. They didn't. Then a week passed. Then 2. I wasn't surprised. They were stalling, hoping I'd change my mind, hoping I'd bend first. But I had already moved on. The Evergreen Lodge was thriving. Renovations were ahead of schedule. The team I'd assembled, my team, was motivated, dedicated, and loyal. Every morning, I woke up excited instead of drained. Instead of fixing someone else's mess, I was building something truly mine. The Cascade Retreat begins to fall. Meanwhile, the Cascade Retreat was making headlines, for all the wrong reasons. A string of bad reviews hit online forums. Guests were complaining about poor service, delayed check-ins, and lack of maintenance. Liam's cost-saving measures had backfired spectacularly. Then, the biggest blow came. A travel magazine that had once ranked the Cascade Retreat as a must-visit getaway published an updated review, and it wasn't pretty. The Cascade Retreat was once a hidden gem, known for its intimate atmosphere and thoughtful service. Under new management, however, it has become a hollow shell of its former self. What was once warm and inviting is now cold and corporate. A cautionary tale of what happens when experience is disregarded for nepotism. Ouch. I read the article twice, feeling both vindicated and a little sad. I had loved that resort once. It had been my home, but my parents had made their choice, and now they were paying for it. I was in a team meeting when my phone buzzed. Mom. I let it ring. A minute later, Dad, then Liam. I ignored all three. It was only when my assistant knocked on the conference room door that I finally caved. "They're outside," she said hesitantly. "Of course they were," I sighed. "Let them in." A minute later, my parents walked in. Mom looked drained, her usually flawless makeup slightly smudged. Dad looked older, as if the past few months had aged him by years. And Liam, he looked furious. "Emily," Mom started, "we need to talk." I folded my arms. "About what?" Dad exhaled. "You know what about." I played dumb. "The weather? Politics? Oh, wait. Is it about the hotel you let Liam destroy?" Liam scoffed. "That's not..." I turned to him. "Save it. I read the reviews." His jaw clenched. Dad pinched the bridge of his nose. "Emily, I cut him off. "You stalled. For weeks. I gave you a clear offer and you ignored it. I've already moved on." Mom's lips tightened. "We didn't ignore it. We just hoped things would turn around." I smiled bitterly. "And how did that work out?" No answer. "Exactly." Dad cleared his throat. "We'll agree to your terms," he said finally. That actually surprised me. But I wasn't about to make this easy. I tilted my head. "Which terms?" "You take over the Cascade Retreat," he said. "Full control. No Liam." Liam looked like he wanted to throw something. "This is bullshit," he snapped. "You're just handing everything to her." Dad shot him a sharp look. "You had your chance, Liam." That shut him up. I pretended to think about it, but I already knew my answer. No. 3 sets of eyes snapped toward me. "No," Mom repeated, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. I leaned back, calm and collected. "I don't need the Cascade Retreat anymore." Their faces fell. Dad's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "But this is our family's legacy." I gave a sad smile. "No, Dad. This was my legacy, and you gave it away." Silence. Liam shifted uncomfortably. Mom opened her mouth, but I stood up before she could speak. "I have a meeting to get to," I said. "You know the way out." I watched as the 3 of them stood there, processing the fact that I wasn't coming back. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. They could keep the Cascade Retreat. I had the Evergreen Lodge, and it was already surpassing their business and guest interest. I had my own success, built on my own terms. As they turned to leave, Mom hesitated at the door. She glanced back at me, and for the first time, I saw something that almost resembled regret in her eyes. Not that I had any reason to believe she'd changed, but maybe, just maybe, she finally understood. That this time, I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I had won, and I didn't need them to tell me that. A week later, a former employee from the Cascade retreat reached out. "You won't believe this," he said. Apparently, my parents had hired a crisis management consultant. They were scrambling to repair the damage Liam had done. But it was too late. The hotel's reputation was in shambles, and they were bleeding money. Some part of me felt bad, but another part of me knew this was justice. You don't take people for granted and expect them to keep saving you. They had sided with Liam. They had ignored my worth. And now, they were paying the price. One night, I stood on the balcony of the Evergreen Lodge, looking out at the breathtaking view of the mountains. This was mine, not handed to me, not gifted, earned. For so long I had craved their approval, but now I realized I didn't need it, and I never had. The days following my final conversation with my parents felt lighter than I had imagined. There was no guilt, no lingering what-ifs, just peace. For years, I had lived under their expectations, constantly proving my worth, fighting for a place that should have been mine without question. But that battle was over. I had won. And not because they finally saw my value, but because I no longer needed them to. It didn't take long for the cracks to turn into full-blown fractures. Guests were canceling reservations. Vendors were pulling out of contracts. And staff turnover was at an all-time high. I heard rumors that banks were considering pulling their loans. A devastating blow that would leave the Cascade retreat in financial ruin. I wasn't happy about it, but I wasn't sorry either. They had made their choices. Now, they had to live with them. One afternoon, as I was reviewing Evergreen Lodge's occupancy rates, my assistant knocked on my office door. "There's someone here to see you," she said hesitantly. "Your father." I sighed, setting my pen down. "Send him in." Dad walked in slowly, his face more lined than I remembered. For the first time, he looked tired, defeated. "I wanted to talk to you," he said, sitting across from me. I didn't respond. I just waited. He exhaled. "The bank is calling in the loan." I nodded. "I know." His jaw tensed. "You do?" "People talk, Dad." Silence. Then, he said the one thing I never expected. "I want to sell you the Cascade retreat." I blinked. Of all the things he could have said, that was the last thing I expected. "You're serious?" He nodded. "You're the only one who can save it." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. For years, I had begged for this opportunity. And now, when everything was in ruins, they wanted me to clean up the mess. I wouldn't fix it for them, but I would take it for myself. I exhaled slowly. "I'll buy it," I said finally. Dad's shoulders sagged in relief, but I wasn't done. On one condition. His eyes met mine. "What's that?" "You and Mom walk away. Completely." He flinched. "Emily, no." I shook my head. This time, I set the terms. He hesitated, but deep down, he knew I was right. The Cascade retreat needed leadership, not nostalgia, not stubborn pride, and certainly not Liam. The official handover happened 2 weeks later. For the first time in my life, the Cascade retreat was mine, not handed to me, not a second-place consolation prize. Mine. I walked through the doors with my own team, ready to undo the damage Liam had caused. There was no sentimentality, only determination. This wasn't about revenge. This was about proving what I already knew, that I had always been the one meant to lead. I renovated, rebranded, and restructured. I brought back the employees who had left under Liam's mismanagement. and slowly, the Cascade Retreat came back to life. One evening, months later, I stood at the balcony of the Cascade Retreat, looking out at the vast mountain view. The lodge had finally returned to its former glory, and beyond. It was even better than before, and now, with both the Cascade Retreat and the Evergreen Lodge under my control, I had built something even greater than I'd imagined. A true hospitality empire. But the biggest victory, I had done it without them, without their approval, without their validation. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. And it felt incredible.